Just gonna grab a chair.
Yeah, sure, grab one there.
Do you remember where we left off?
Well, kind of. So, yeah.
Okay.
You know, as I said, Mom and Dad were married in 1921 in Sydney, Ohio, at all Holy Angels Church. Three of the children were born there: Margaret, Joan, and Jim. It's interesting, Joan, and the way we pronounce the name, the second child. Not Joan, not Joanne, but Joan. Again, I'm quite certain this is not fiction, what I'm going to tell you, but I would like to double check all the records to make certain. Married at Holy Angels Church, and in those days you didn't always have a priest that spoke English, obviously very much like it is today sometimes in these churches, you know, in English speaking when the Spanish people come in, or people from France oft times. So they were at Holy Angels Church, and when Dad took Joan up to be baptized, the parish priest was on vacation, and his place was a French priest. And Dad spoke to him. Dad knew a little bit of French. Remember I told you he had spent the wartime in France at the estate of a French woman, American actually, who spoke French. And so he knew a little bit of French, and he spoke to the French, and the priest said, quel est ton nom? What is going to be the name of the priest? And Dad probably said, Joan, instead of Joan. Well, at least that's what I heard. And the priest said, Joan. And Dad sort of liked that, you know. Hey, instead of Joan, it could have been that Dad said Joanne. And he, being a French priest, seeing the paper in front of him as he were handed it by Dad, said, oh, c'est très bien, c'est Joan. At least that's as I have heard the story. Now, it's interesting, of course, that in those days, the woman, that is my mom, Joan's, would not go to the church. They would stay home. There was some sort of it, I don't know exactly what it was, but you'd take the child to church rather early in the life of the child, oft times, the whole business about getting baptized before they die, and a number of other things that turned out that they would bring them to church early. And so the mothers had not yet finished their purification. You know, there was this business that you had to be purified in some fashion after delivering a child, that somehow the birth of a child cast you in a spell not to be totally purified. Again, what those, in fact, meant, what those terms meant, but they were expressions used. As a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, we still have a feast today we may call the Feast of the Purification, but I'd have to check that too to make absolutely certain. So, but it is true that Mom didn't go. But it could be also that she being in the hospital for 2 weeks, maybe the baby was brought home. And although I don't think they would bring the baby home before they brought the mother home, but nevertheless, Mom was not there. So there was no correction. And Dad, of course, in triumph, comes back with his newly baptized second daughter, very proud. And he presented her to Mom and said, Joan. And from there on in, whether James, who was not born yet, might have been Margaret, of course, or maybe Mom herself, but she's always went by the name of Joan. Though I believe, and here's the part that's a little bit fictional, I believe she was to be called Catherine Jean. Now I'd have to check, really, the birth certificate. And we can check that in the census records, because the other way that story is told is that said Catherine Jean. And that name would be pronounced in French G-E-J-E-A-N, closer to Jean than would be Dad trying to pronounce the name with a French accent. So I don't know which of those stories are true, but I would like to see, at least in some document, whether her name, was there a Catherine? Did you ever know her as Catherine in these things? So I think that was what it was supposed to be.
Yeah, Catherine Joan, actually, is what I saw.
Catherine Joan, right, and I'd be willing to bet that I heard it was going to be Catherine Jean. Although I don't know Jean's in the family. That's fascinating too, because while I'm at it right now, we in our family always went by our second names. We have no idea why. Dad was William Leo, and he always went by Leo, not William. I was born William David. I always went by David, named after Dad. Margaret, however, the first child in the family, born in 22, was called Margaret Lee. Lee being Dad's, Leo or Lee, second name. Mom, of course, was that crazy long name, Frida, Megel, Amelia, Veronica, Miller, Megel. We used to love pronouncing that when what's your mom's name? Frida, Amelia, Veronica, Miller, Megel. All those names were tagged onto her. And then the kids would say, well, we call her Mom. We thought that was a pretty smart thing to be able to say. People would laugh. But anyway, and then James Miller came along. James, again, taking Mom's maiden name Miller. That was what he came up with. And then Mary Elizabeth, called her Betty, but it was Mary Elizabeth. And that's again a second name. Well, I wanted to get to Jerry. Her name was, and so she always was, Geraldine Francis. So she went with that name. It was on her driver's license, it was on whatever other document she carried around, Social Security card. When she went to Europe for the first time, she had to get a passport, and she went down to the Department of the Vital Statistics in Detroit to get a birth certificate so she could, and went through the number of birth dates of the children. Margaret, March 26, 1921, Joan, June 25th, 1924, and so on. And he came to, and I forget what Jerry's was June 10th, and he came to Bertha, June 10th, and then Anne, Dorothy Ann, April 23rd, 1933. Jerry says, there's no Geraldine in there? No. Look at him again, he ran down. When he got done to June 10th, he said, stop. And there, the name was written by the man, he showed her, it was Bertha. Now what the rest of it was, we don't know. Of course, Jerry then took the birth certificate home. She had never actually seen it, and went up to Mom and said, Mom, look at this. I tried to get the birth certificate here for the passport I'm filing. And look what it says. She says, oh yeah, I remember now. I forgot to tell the nurse that I changed your name. So, so she had officially Bertha, her entire name, because Mom forgot to tell the nurse to change her name. She must have done. And there was, now when I say Bertha, I have to do a little bit of checking, because it might have been a slightly different name. My mind is slipping me now from time to time. I know that's the story. And if it wasn't Bertha, it was some other name that was far from being an appropriate name that Mom ordinarily would have chosen for her daughter. So anyway, getting back to Joan, that's how she presumably got her name. The other interesting story is there was a doctor that delivered, and your mother was an instrument baby, as Mom called her. She had to use the instruments to be delivered. Now, did that mean she was in breech? I don't know. But they said she would, Mom told me this story, that she was an instrument baby. The doctor, and I used to know his name, and if you give me times I could probably go to it, was arrested shortly after her birth because of, at least fined, and was recalled, had to stop practicing for a while because he was not keeping up with the medical standards of his day. It was a fairly big disgrace in a small town like Sydney, where he had delivered hundreds of babies, that this man should have been called in for lack of proper sanitation or whatever else it was that happened. We could kid Joan that she wasn't a sanitized baby when she was born, and she was, for that reason, she was so snazzy all the time. But no, your Joan, my sister, was, in my experience, certainly within the family, the most gentle person. A very gentle person. Jim was quiet. Margaret was very, had charge of the family because she was the first one born and so on. And Joan would assist in all sorts of things. And being so gentle, she was closest to Mom. I don't think of all the girls, anybody was as close to Frida as your mom, Joan Megel or Joan Megel. Leo, of course, was Margaret Leo, and that was, in a certain sense, Dad's child. I don't mean that, all the children were loved, but there was a certain, and that really was true because Joan was the one who stayed home the longest. in the line of those that married, all right? I forget how old she was when she got married, 28, 29?
31.
31. And she took mom every place. Downtown shopping, would do things all the time. She wasn't a homebody. I mean, she went out and danced and cowed around by the other people, but she was always incredibly close to mom in her life. The first person to when she came back from the war, she put mom and dad in a car and actually brought little baby Sue along at the time, who was only 6 or 7, whatever it might be, and took them on a trip to New York, took mom and dad to New York. Went on the subway, wasn't a very good, actually wasn't a very good driver. She was a good driver, but she certainly screwed up her car one time. She came back and told me about it. They were in Pennsylvania, and with all the, the business, the money angle of everything, you got to save your pennies. You can't be spending extra money, so you're going down a big hill in the Pennsylvania Turnpike. What do? You turn the key off, and they didn't have power steering, they didn't have power brakes, so you weren't cutting off anything. But my goodness, we're going to just roll down this hill, and we'll look at all the gas we'll save as we roll down the hill, of course. What she does, not thinking, is then when she gets near the bottom of the hill, she throws the clutch in, puts it in first gear, and at 40 miles an hour, screwed the hell out of her transmission. You can't start a motor at 30 miles an hour through one of those cars in a gear shift. Now, how many gears she broke, I don't know, but she ended up down at the bottom of the hill, and they were safe. So she told me that. She was very generous too. I mean, your mom was incredible, especially to her favorite little brother. Tim not being born yet, Jim was too much of a battle for her, but her favorite little brother was yours truly. She let me use her car, especially on dates, and I just had to have a date to her car in case I'm on a bus. So she let me use her car. She was also always, I would beg her for things. I always thought she had the first person in our family, other than dad, to have a car. That was one big deal. One of the daughters to have her own car. On our street, there were one car per family, and some families didn't have cars. But we had 2, and that second one was Joan, a 49 red Chevy. I thought it was cool. Anyway, so she had that particular car, and I was delighted. I said, hey, she started to pull away from the curb, and I said, hey, Joan, let me just ride on a running board. They have running boards these days. You guys probably don't know what that is, but it's a little step kind of affair that was on the side of the car just below the door on the driver's side and on the passenger side. So I thought that was cool. So here she rolled the window down, she let her little brother, I'm 13 I guess it was, maybe 14, hop on the running board, and she takes off from our home going towards Davison. And of course I saw these guys who were jumping off the cars, dropping papers at corners, they would pick up, and I hadn't done the physics properly. So what I did was I jumped off going in the rear direction. Well, that 2 to 3 times doubles the speed with which you contact that ground. If you jump off going in the motion of the car, you're fine. My physics was way off, and that was the last I heard for about 8 hours. I lay unconscious for 8 hours in the home of the Timmises, who were not our favorite neighbors, but they were okay because I jumped off right at their house. Joan felt horrible, of course, for having done that, but that was her brother. And she, later on, still, when I got a driver's license, but we made a deal. I had to pay for the additional insurance, working for Dad at the time, so I could drive her car. I didn't do very well, and she only restricted me one time when I had a whole long Sunday with 2 girlfriends I had, and I ran out every ounce of gas she had in her car, and the next morning she was late to work. She had to walk 10 blocks to go carry 5 blocks to go carry some gas, so I was grounded, as it were, not using her car until I realized I had to drop some gas in there. So she made you sort of toe the line. At the same time, she was the gentlest person I know, and spent a lot of time with my sister Sue in that regard. She was very kind to Sue, and Sue appreciated the attention that Joan gave her. she and I being born on the same day, June 25th, that was a kind of a connection with us in that regard. Later on when I grew up, it was more so. Before she had a big family and so on, we would go out and have dinner or go to a restaurant. No, not a fancy restaurant, probably nothing so good as a McDonald's or anything like that. Maybe a Kresge counter, or something like that. But we would go out on our joint birthday or the day before. Anyways, they had these children. They moved, excuse me, I digress, as they say. So, yes.
I'm just going to turn this light on.
Okay.
But you can continue. I just want to make sure when as the sun goes down, we got enough light. There it is. Okay.
Well, anyway, let's. I probably should slow down and probably shouldn't tell so many stories. Joan, after Joan came Betty. Betty was born with a serious heart condition. Mom knew about it. The doctor said they could try an operation. What it specifically was, I don't know, but I think it was a malfunctioning valve of some sort. Mom didn't chance it. She was told the child would not be able ordinarily to enter into the same games that the other children did. Mom told me one time she wasn't going to put that on her. She wasn't going to say you couldn't run with the other girls and kids. So I don't remember Betty as we called her, Mary Elizabeth, ever having any restrictions she thought to abide by. However, I do think that she didn't have the strength that the other children had, and she was quite reserved in her, strength. She didn't have as much stamina, and she was reserved also in her social demeanor. She would be more quiet off. She did find her talent, which was singing, and she did take singing lessons, and she was quite good, and she sang in the church choir. She inherited Dad's singing voice. Dad was in the choir at Holy Angels down in Sydney, Ohio, and he had a great voice, a tenor also. And I think Betty inherited his voice. Obviously my sister Ann didn't, and neither did my brother Jim. But and she again now was 7 years older than I was, so I didn't know that much about her. I don't remember her having many boyfriends, but she did belong to what was called the Madcappers. The Madcappers was a young people's club up at St. Bridget's for, in those days the Catholic Church was your social source, social connections and religious and in many ways financial life, I suppose, and so on. But in any case, so that was Betty. Jerry, of course, Geraldine Francis, who I said was misnamed, didn't determine that until she was much older. She was enthralled that when she became 16, who would appear on the screen but Tim, the youngest brother. Now when I say 16, I'll have to check that again. Jerry's 5 years older than I am, and I'm 11 years older than Tim. So yeah, 16 years. So she's 16, just at, the young adulthood, and here comes this little baby. So she had a very strong attachment to Tim and taking care of him. Later on in years, I asked Jerry how that was, and she said that it was a burden in some ways, that she thought she was burdened by taking care of that. After all, Mom was 50 years old and Tim was born, or 49, and that's pretty old at that time to be nursing and caring for a child. And Jerry was, the family sort of divided at Betty. Mark and Joan and Jim, they were the old people. Betty, she was there, and she didn't exactly go with the older crowd, and she was a little too old and maybe more fragile to go with the younger crowd. Jerry was our leader. Jerry, Ann, David, Sue, and of course Tim, so many years later, as it were. But the other four of us hung together pretty much. Jerry, Ann, Sue, and myself. In any case, she taught me how to roller skate. She she served Mom very well. That is, Joan, as I said, was probably closer to Mom in temperament and personality, and certainly in sensitivity to people's needs. And Jerry was very much almost an administrator, as if she became a mother in taking care of Tim. I mean, that's somewhat of a sense I have of it. Sometimes these things are creations of your own mind and have no foundations in fact. But I see Jerry as someone who would take responsibility, take my hand when going across the street. Be careful, David, now, because here I was 5 years younger than she was, obviously. At 5, she's 10, and a 10-year-old is supposed to boss around everybody, as you know. So Jerry could boss me around, no problem. And I wasn't strong enough to beat up on her either, so I had to do what she said. She went away, however, and left in 49 to enter the convent. In 49, I was exactly 13 years old. Or was it 14? I don't know, 35, yeah. Virtually she went away virtually in 48. She went away in January of 49, when I wasn't quite 13. So I had those 12 days with her. And at the same time, the time that I came to know her, I was growing up. I have a memory of my older brothers and sisters in many ways because as a child, they are terribly important in the way they behave. I mean, I was impressed by Margaret having a boyfriend come to the house. I was impressed by Margaret, Joan having this car and being in the Navy, and Jim being in the Navy. But when you start growing up yourself and you get close to the others, they can be your friends, but you're not so much interested in their lives, and you don't see them as more dominant in your whole behavior. At least that's how I think of Jerry. Anne and I became very close. Anne had the most forgiving attitude regarding her own behavior. I mean, she could do things crazy and defend herself because that's exactly the way it should have been done. So even if she did things wrong, it seems to me she could know that they were right because she had done them. I mean, this is the way Anne appeared to me to become. But she was also my ally. One thing I've got to tell you that's a little bit, personal and embarrassing, is that Mom paid a lot of attention to me, gave me a good deal of attention that in some ways I certainly didn't deserve. I had nothing to merit it, but there was a kind of, I don't know exactly what it was, and Anne sensed that, if you ever heard the Smothers Brothers with Tommy and Tommy Smothers and Dickie Smothers, Tommy always said, "Mother liked you best." Well, Anne could say that, and it wouldn't embarrass her. She wouldn't be disappointed at all. "Mother liked you best." Yeah, that's what she said. So she, in fact, then said, when we wanted to go someplace, "God, David, you go ask Mom. You go ask Mom. You go ask Mom." And I did, and it didn't work. I mean, so Anne had no problem. But Anne also lived in her life. Her whole life can be divided into two major parts: the real things that were part of her life and the fantasy that was part of her life. And the real things were about, I would say, 5%. The fantasy was about 95%. I mean, Anne had the incredible fantasy and was the director of all the plays we put on. She was the director of all the shows that we did, all the games we played. I could go on for quite a bit about Anne, and I've done quite a bit of rewriting about Anne. I've stayed in since she died very young, and her kids, she was gone by the time she was 63 or 4. I had a great memory of her, and so yes, each of her birthdays, I've written a short story about Anne and my experience with her. So that was a lot of fun to have an older sister who, in fact, was a very good friend with you. When I talk about her fantasy, for example,